How strong were ancient humans, really? Here's a number to sit with. A woman grinding grain by hand 7,000 years ago had arm bones stronger than those of an elite competitive rower today. Not a farmer, not a laborer, an Olympic-level athlete, out-muscled by an ordinary Stone Age woman doing her morning chores. And that's just the appetizer, because when you actually dig into the skeletons, the muscle and the biology of our ancestors, you find something with three twists in it. In some ways, ancient humans were so much stronger than you that it's almost embarrassing. In one specific way, though, you genuinely beat them. You have an ability their raw muscle couldn't match. And in the most surprising twist of all, it turns out every human alive, ancient or modern, is secretly the weakling of the ape family. We are all far weaker than a creature we're closely related to. And that weakness is the whole reason we conquered the planet. So how strong were ancient humans? Let's dig in. Before we can answer that, we have to deal with a trap hidden in the question. Because the word strong is doing a lot of quiet lying. We treat strength like it's one single thing, one number, like a score. But it isn't. There are completely different kinds of strength, and they don't always live in the same body. There's peak strength, the absolute most force you can produce in one explosive moment. The deadlift, the single heaviest thing you can pick up off the ground. There's endurance strength, the ability to keep working, keep carrying, keep moving for hours and hours without collapsing. There's structural toughness, how dense your bones are, how much punishment your frame can take before it breaks. And then there's baseline strength, not the strength of a trained champion, but the ordinary, everyday strength of a random person plucked from the population. The strength of the average. And here's why that distinction matters so much. When we ask how strong were ancient humans, we're usually imagining a cartoon, a muscle-bound caveman who could outlift a modern bodybuilder. But that's the wrong comparison, and it gives the wrong answer. The honest answer splits apart the moment you separate those different kinds of strength. On some of them, the ancient human wins in a landslide. On others, it's a lot closer than you'd think, and a modern specialist might even come out ahead. The real question was never a simple, were they strong? It's strong in what way, and why did we change so dramatically? Because make no mistake, we did change. The body you're living in right now is, by at least one measure, the product of the softest, most physically comfortable existence any human has ever had. You almost certainly grew up sitting in chairs, carried by cars, fed without hunting, warmed without chopping, and entertained without moving. And your skeleton knows it. So the uncomfortable possibility we have to take seriously is that you might be walking around in one of the weakest bodies the human species has ever produced. Not because there's anything wrong with you, but because of how you were built by your life. To find out if that's true, we start where the evidence is hardest and most honest. In the bones. Bone is not the dead, static scaffolding most people imagine. It's living tissue, and it responds to how you use it, almost like muscle does. Stress a bone, load it, pound it, pull on it with hardworking muscles day after day. And it thickens, densifies, and reshapes itself to handle the load. Leave it unstressed, sit still for years, and it quietly thins out and weakens. This means your skeleton is a kind of logbook. It's a permanent physical record of how hard your body worked over a lifetime. And crucially, that record survives death by thousands of years, which means archaeologists can pick up an ancient bone and, in a real sense, read how strong its owner was. So they did. And the results are genuinely humbling. A researcher named Colin Shaw at Cambridge ran a study comparing the leg bones of ancient humans to modern people, including modern athletes. He looked at foragers, hunter-gatherers from thousands of years ago, and measured the strength of their leg bones against everyone from sedentary modern students to cross-country runners. The prehistoric foragers didn't just beat the couch sitters. Their leg bones were comparable to those of today's elite, highly trained distance runners. Let that register. The everyday walking, running, and roaming of ordinary Stone Age life built legs equivalent to a modern athlete who trains for a living. Their normal was our elite. But the most jaw-dropping finding came from a study led by a researcher named Alison McIntosh, also at Cambridge, and it focused on women. She examined the arm bones of women from the early farming era, the Neolithic through the Bronze and Iron Ages, and compared their bone strength to living women, including a squad of elite university rowers, some of them world class, who train brutally hard. What she found rewrote the picture completely. The arm bones of those ancient farming women were, on average, stronger than the arm bones of the modern elite rowers, around 16% stronger than the athletes, and nearly a third stronger than ordinary modern women. And the reason is almost unbelievable. It was grinding grain. Every single day for hours, these women knelt and pushed a heavy stone back and forth across another stone to crush grain into flour by hand, a motion called saddle querning. Hour after hour, day after day, year after year from childhood. That relentless manual labor loaded their arms so consistently that it built bone denser and stronger than what world-class rowing produces in modern athletes. The housework of the ancient world was, biomechanically, more demanding than elite modern sport. Now zoom out because there's an even bigger pattern in the bones. When scientists track human bone density across the long sweep of time, they find that our skeletons used to be dramatically more robust, thicker-walled, denser, heavier duty, and that this robustness collapsed relatively recently. A team of researchers examining the internal, spongy structure of human bone found that early humans and our older relatives had bone that was far denser and more reinforced than ours. And the lightening of the human skeleton, the shift to the thinner, more fragile bones most of us carry today, didn't happen deep in the evolutionary past. It happened mostly within the last 10,000 years or so, arriving hand in hand with farming and settling down. When humans stopped ranging across the landscape and started staying put, planting, and eventually building comfortable lives, our bones got the message and quietly demobilized. Your relatively graceful, easily broken modern skeleton is a recent development. For most of human existence, people were built tougher. And it wasn't just bone strength, it was toughness in the most brutal, literal sense. When paleoanthropologists examine ancient skeletons, especially Neanderthals, they keep finding something striking. Healed injuries, broken bones that mended, fractured arms, cracked ribs, smashed skulls that the person survived and lived on with. One famous analysis found that the pattern of injuries on Neanderthal skeletons resembled the injury pattern of modern rodeo riders. The kind of trauma you get from grappling with large, powerful, panicking animals at close range. These were people getting hurt in violent, physical ways, and then getting up, healing, and carrying on. Their bodies could absorb punishment that would put a modern person in a hospital for months. So the verdict from the bones is not subtle. In terms of everyday, baseline strength and structural toughness, ordinary ancient humans would, on average, be considerably stronger and far more durable than ordinary modern humans. Not because they trained for it, but because their entire lives, from childhood, were one continuous, unavoidable strength and conditioning program. Now let's look at the specific bodies that program produced, starting with the strongest humans who may have ever lived. The Neanderthals are the closest thing to the cartoon strongman the word caveman conjures, except the reality is more impressive than the cartoon. They were shorter than us on average, but built like tanks, barrel-chested with thick, dense bones, broad shoulders, and enormous muscle attachment points, which tell us the muscles anchored there were huge. Their grip strength in particular is thought to have been ferocious, well beyond the modern human range. Everything about their skeleton screams raw physical power, and that power was forged by how they hunted. Neanderthals lived in cold, harsh environments and hunted enormous, dangerous Ice Age animals, and the evidence suggests they often did it up close, with thrusting spears, essentially wrestling their prey to death at close quarters rather than picking it off from a distance. That's where those rodeo rider injuries come from. Their entire way of life was a series of violent, full-body, close-contact struggles with animals that could weigh as much as a car. You do not survive that lifestyle without immense functional strength. A Neanderthal's power wasn't the polished, isolated strength of a gym. It was the total, explosive, whole-body strength of an ambush predator that had to physically overpower megafauna to eat. Pound for pound, they may well have been the strongest members of the entire human family that ever existed. But here's where the story takes its first great turn. Because our own lineage, Homo sapiens, and our ancestors like Homo erectus did not go the Neanderthal route. We didn't double down on raw muscle. We went in almost the opposite direction, and it turned out to be a superpower. While Neanderthals became powerful close-range fighters, our lineage became something no other creature on Earth is: endurance machines. Our ancestors evolved into the greatest long-distance movers in the animal kingdom. The evidence is written all over our bodies. We have a springy Achilles tendon and long, elastic tendons in our legs that store and release energy with every stride, like coiled springs, making our running absurdly efficient. We have a special ligament at the back of the skull that stabilizes our head while running. We lost most of our body hair and became the sweatiest animals alive, covered in millions of sweat glands, so we can dump heat and keep going in conditions that would force other animals to stop and overheat. Put it together, and you get one of the most remarkable abilities in nature: persistence hunting. A human can't outsprint an antelope. Over a short distance, it's not even close. But a human can do something the antelope cannot. A human can keep running. And running. In the midday heat, a person can jog after an animal for hours, never letting it rest, until the animal, unable to sweat and cool itself the way we do, literally overheats and collapses from heat exhaustion. Then the human, still standing, walks up and takes it. Groups like the San of the Kalahari and other traditional hunters have been documented doing exactly this, running prey to death across the savanna over the course of many hours. That is a kind of strength too. It's just not the kind you can see in a bicep. It's the strength of an engine that refuses to stop. And there was a second signature ability our lineage developed: throwing. Humans are the only animal on Earth that can hurl an object with real speed and pinpoint accuracy. Our shoulders evolved specifically for it. They act like a slingshot, storing elastic energy and releasing it to whip the arm forward at astonishing speed. This is why a human can throw a spear, or a rock, hard enough and straight enough to kill from a distance. It doesn't look like brute strength, but it's an incredibly powerful, specialized athletic act, and it changed everything. It meant humans could kill without having to wrestle prey up close the way the Neanderthals did. We could be strong from a safe distance. You can still see the endurance legacy in living people today. The Hadza of Tanzania, studied by the researcher Herman Poncer, walk and move enormous amounts every single day. Their ordinary life involves a level of physical activity that would exhaust most modern people. The Tarahumara of Mexico are famous for running incredible distances, hundreds of kilometers, seemingly for the joy of it, in thin sandals. This is the human body doing what it was actually built to do. Not to lift one enormous weight once, but to move endlessly across a landscape. Which brings us to the final and strangest twist. The one that reframes this entire question. Because for all this talk of strong ancestors, there is an animal in our own family that would humiliate any human who ever lived, ancient or modern, in a raw contest of strength. The chimpanzee. For a long time, there were wild, exaggerated claims that chimps were 5 or 10 times stronger than humans. That's a myth. But when scientists actually measured it carefully, a detailed study by a researcher named Matthew O'Neill and colleagues, they found that pound for pound, a chimpanzee really is meaningfully stronger than a human, producing roughly 1.5 times as much pulling and pushing force from the same amount of muscle. Kilo for kilo of muscle, the chimp wins, clearly and consistently. Why? The answer is buried in the muscle itself. Chimpanzee muscle has a much higher proportion of fast twitch fibers, the explosive, powerful, force-generating kind. Human muscle is far richer in slow twitch fibers, the fatigue-resistant, enduring kind. In other words, at some point in our evolution, our lineage systematically swapped out raw power fibers for endurance fibers. We literally traded strength for stamina at the cellular level. The chimp kept the horsepower. We rebuilt our engine for distance. So here's the astonishing conclusion this forces on us. Every human being who has ever lived, the Neanderthal wrestling a mammoth, the farming woman with arms stronger than a rower, the modern Olympic weightlifter, Every single one of us is, pound for pound, a weakling compared to our closest ape relatives. We are the weak ape. And we did not become weaker by accident or by failure. We did it on purpose, over millions of years, because being strong in that raw, chimp-like way was not the winning strategy. Something else was. So step back and put the whole picture together, because the trait at the center of this story is one of the most important deals our species ever made. Muscle is extraordinarily expensive. It costs enormous amounts of energy to build and to carry around every second of every day, whether you're using it or not. And every calorie your body spends feeding big, powerful muscles is a calorie it can't spend on something else. Our lineage made a radical bet. It started pulling energy away from raw muscle and pouring it into other things. Into endurance, which let us hunt in a way nothing else could. Into a throwing shoulder, which let us kill from a distance. Into fine motor control, the delicate, precise hand movements that let us make tools, control fire, sew, carve, and eventually build everything. And above all, into the brain. The human brain is a monstrous energy hog, burning around a fifth of all the calories we consume. Just sitting there thinking, we are not the strong ape. We are the ape that sold its strength to buy a bigger brain, better endurance, and cleverer hands. And it was the best trait in the history of life on Earth. We gave up the power to crush, and we gained the power to outthink, outlast, and outtool every other creature alive. But that trade-off explains the deep past. It explains why humans, as a species, are weaker than chimps. It does not explain why you, specifically, are probably weaker than your own great-great-grandparents. And that's the second, more recent, and more troubling part of the story. Because even after we became the weak endurance ape, ordinary humans were still, by our standards, remarkably strong. Remember those farming women, those forager legs. The strength was still there because life still demanded it. Every day was physical. Every meal had to be worked for. The body was loaded from childhood, so the body built itself accordingly. And then, only in the last few thousand years, and dramatically in the last 100, we engineered the physical demand out of life. We invented the plow, then the machine, then the engine, then the chair, the car, the elevator, and the delivery app. We built a world where it is entirely possible to go an entire day, an entire week, barely loading your muscles and bones at all. And because bone and muscle only build themselves in response to being used, they've quietly powered down. The result is a strange historical fact. The average modern human is very likely the weakest human that has ever existed. Not because we're a weaker kind of human, genetically you carry the same blueprint as that grain-grinding woman, but because we no longer live the life that switches that strength on. There's a fascinating flip side, though, and honesty demands we include it. At the very top end, the strongest individual humans alive today may actually be the strongest humans who have ever lived, in raw peak terms. A modern elite strongman or powerlifter has things no ancient human ever had: unlimited calories, a mountain of protein, a century of accumulated training science, and the ability to rest and recover completely between efforts. That combination can build a body that lifts more in a single explosive moment than any Stone Age human likely could. So the picture is genuinely split. Our peak is higher than ever. Our average has never been lower. Ancient humans didn't have our supermen at the top, but they didn't have our vast, soft, underbuilt middle either. Nearly everyone back then lived somewhere in the range we'd now consider seriously, functionally strong. So the real answer to how strong were ancient humans is layered. Weaker than a chimp, like all of us. That's the deep evolutionary trade. But dramatically stronger than the average person today, in bone, in toughness, in all-day functional power. Because their entire life was the training we now have to pay a gym to simulate. They were the strong version of the weak ape. We're the weak version of the weak ape. And the only thing that changed the blueprint is how we live. So go back to that woman, 7,000 years ago, kneeling in the morning light, pushing a stone back and forth to grind the day's grain, building, without any idea she was doing it, arms that would outmuscle a modern Olympic athlete. She wasn't a genetic superhuman. She wasn't a different species. She was carrying the exact same body you are, the same muscles, the same bones, the same ancient capacity for strength written in the same blueprint you're using right now to sit and listen to this. The only difference between her body and yours is what the two of you were asked to do with it every day. Her life demanded strength, so her body delivered it. Your life demands very little, so your body, obediently, efficiently, gives you very little back. Not because it's broken, because it's doing exactly what it was designed to do. Build only what you use, which means the strength of your ancestors isn't gone. It's not lost to some distant, tougher breed of human. It's latent, folded up, and waiting inside the same frame you carry around every day, the way it waited inside every human who ever lived. The machinery that ran down antelopes in the midday heat, that ground grain into flour for hours, that wrestled Ice Age giants and healed from wounds that should have killed, is still in there. It's still yours. It's just waiting, like it always has, for you to give it a reason.